Hockey is one of the fastest and toughest sports in the world. The game can be beautiful, with skill, speed, and moments of pure magic. But it also has a dark side. Over the years, the NHL has seen players who were so rough, so unpredictable, and so downright scary that just stepping on the ice with them felt dangerous. These men were more than hockey players. They were enforcers, villains, and legends of fear. Fans both hated and admired them. Opponents often dreaded them. Today, we're looking back at the 10 scariest players in NHL history. And we have to start with a man whose name is almost a synonym for fear in hockey, Bob Probert. Probert played in the 1980s and 1990s, and to this day his reputation still echoes. When people think of the ultimate hockey enforcer, Probert is usually the first name they bring up. He wasn't just a fighter, he was the fighter. At 6'3" and over 220 pounds, he towered over many of his opponents, and when his gloves dropped, everyone in the arena knew what was coming. He could take punches, give them back harder, and keep going long after most players would have been down. But what made Probert so terrifying wasn't just his size or his fists. It was the fact that he was always ready. Some tough guys fight when they feel cornered. Probert seemed to live for it. Rival players admitted that even if you want to fight against him, it didn't matter. He'd come back the next shift, the next period, or the next game, and he'd drag you into another one. There was no escaping him. Yet the story of Bob Probert isn't just about fights. Off the ice, his life was messy. He battled addictions that often landed him in trouble with the law. In one infamous moment, he was caught smuggling cocaine across the border. His struggles with alcohol were widely known, and his demons followed him through much of his career. What's haunting is that, despite all of this, he was loved by fans. Detroit fans in particular adored him, chanting his name as he dropped his gloves, even when they knew he was risking his health. On the ice, he racked up over 3,300 penalty minutes in his career, which basically means he spent weeks of his life in the penalty box. But even with all that time sitting out, he still scored goals and had a real role on his teams. Probert was more than just a fist. He could play, and that made him even scarier, because you couldn't just dismiss him as a sideshow. He was a real threat, shift after shift. From his battles with Domi to his wars with other heavyweights of the time, every Probert fight was a spectacle. Fans came to games just to see him drop the gloves. Sadly, his life ended far too soon. In 2010, only 45 years old, Probert passed away suddenly while boating with his family. Later, studies of his brain revealed that he had CTE, a condition caused by repeated head trauma, which helped explain some of the struggles he faced during his life. It was a tragic ending for a man who had become a symbol of hockey's violent side. He wasn't just one of the scariest players in NHL history. He was the scariest, the standard by which all other enforcers are measured. After Bob Probert, we move to another kind of scary, the type that comes from pure size and strength. No one represents that better than Zdeno Chara. At 6'9" without skates, Chara wasn't just big, he was a giant in every sense. When he stepped onto the ice, he made professional hockey players, men who were already strong and tough, look like kids standing next to their father. His wingspan, his reach, and his sheer power made him one of the most intimidating figures in sports, not just hockey. Now, Chara wasn't a brawler in the same way Probert was. He didn't need to fight every night, but when he did, it was like watching a man wrestle with a toy. Players who were known as fighters often refused to go near him. Even the toughest guys admitted they thought twice before tangling with Chara. One wrong move and he could ragdoll you, tossing you aside as if you weighed nothing. But what made Chara truly frightening was how he used his body in the game. He could shut you down with one hit, and sometimes those hits went too far. The most infamous moment came in 2011, when he checked Max Pacioretty into a metal stanchion. The impact was so brutal that Pacioretty was carried off the ice on a stretcher with a fractured vertebra. The hockey world erupted. Some called for Chara to be banned. Others defended him, saying it was a terrible accident. But one thing was clear, Chara's presence alone could change the course of a game, and maybe even a career. And it wasn't just his size, Chara also had skill. He could skate, pass, and had one of the hardest shots ever recorded. That combination of skill and raw power made him one of the most respected, yet also one of the most feared players of his generation. If Chara was scary because of his size and strength, then Chris Pronger was scary because of his attitude. Pronger was a defenseman who played like he had a personal grudge against everyone on the ice. At 6'6", he wasn't quite as tall as Chara, but he carried himself with the same level of intimidation. He was mean, ruthless, and sometimes downright dirty. If you played against Pronger, you had to expect pain. He used his stick like a weapon. Slashes, cross-checks, sneaky elbows. He didn't care if he got caught, because by the time the referee raised his arm, the damage was already done. And the thing about Pronger was that he enjoyed it. One of the moments that still sticks in fans' minds is when he stomped on another player's leg with his skate. It was shocking, dangerous, and it summed up why people feared him so much. He didn't just want to beat you. He wanted to break you. But here's the twist. Pronger wasn't just a bully. He was one of the best defensemen in the NHL. He could control the game, quarterback the power play, and shut down the other team's best players. He won the Hart Trophy as league MVP, which is almost unheard of for a defenseman. He was the perfect mix of talent and cruelty. And much like Chara, his reputation went beyond just fights or hits. Opponents admitted that simply seeing Pronger on the other team's lineup sheet changed how they played. He lived rent-free in their heads before the puck even dropped. Between Chara's massive size and Pronger's nasty edge, they represent a different type of fear compared to Probert. They didn't just fight you. They controlled the game through intimidation, and that made every shift against them a nightmare. If Chara and Pronger scared players with size and cruelty, Scott Stevens terrified people with his timing. Stevens wasn't the tallest player on the ice, but he was built like a tank and had a gift for landing open ice hits that could end careers. He played defense with one mission: to make sure anyone who dared skate through his zone paid the price. And most of the time, that price was brutal. His most infamous moment came during the 2003 Stanley Cup Final. Anaheim Ducks star Paul Correa carried the puck across the middle of the ice when Stevens lined him up. The hit was thunderous. Correa collapsed to the ice, motionless, his helmet bouncing away. For a moment, the arena went silent. It looked like his career might be over right there. But in one of hockey's most haunting and unforgettable scenes, Correa later returned to the game, scored a goal, and the crowd erupted. Still, the image of him lying on the ice after Stevens' hit showed just how devastating Stevens could be. He wasn't dirty in the same sense as Pronger. He didn't slash or stomp. Instead, he used perfect timing and incredible strength to destroy opponents in legal, but terrifying, ways. Players admitted they looked over their shoulders every time they crossed the blue line, terrified that Stevens might be waiting. Now, where Stevens used his body like a wrecking ball, Domi made his mark with his fists and his personality. Domi wasn't the biggest guy on the ice. In fact, at 5'10", he was shorter than most enforcers of his era. But what he lacked in size, he made up for with fearlessness. He fought anyone, no matter how big or strong. He became one of the most recognizable faces of the NHL in the 1990s and early 2000s because of his wild fights. Every time he dropped the gloves, the crowd roared. And while some fighters looked nervous before a brawl, Domi looked like he was having fun. He smiled, he taunted, and he thrived on chaos. One of the most unforgettable moments of Domi's career didn't even involve another player. In 2001, during a game in Philadelphia, a Flyers fan leaned over the glass to yell at Domi while he sat in the penalty box. The glass panel suddenly broke, and the fan tumbled right into the box with him. Without missing a beat, Domi started throwing punches. It was wild, dangerous, and pure Domi, fearless and unpredictable. He ended his career with more than 3,500 penalty minutes, placing him among the top of all time. Stevens and Domi represent two different sides of hockey fear. Stevens could shatter your body with one hit, while Domi could break your spirit by dragging you into a fight you didn't want. Both left lasting marks on the NHL, and both are remembered as legends of intimidation. Some players are remembered not just for their toughness, but for moments so shocking that they left scars on the league itself. Few stories capture that better than Marty McSorley. McSorley was already known as one of the NHL's most feared enforcers during the 1980s and 1990s. He spent years protecting Wayne Gretzky, making sure no one touched hockey's greatest star without paying the price. He was tough, he was mean, and he had no problem dropping the gloves with anyone. For much of his career, he was respected as one of the league's most dangerous bodyguards. But everything changed on February 21, 2000. That night, McSorley and Donald Brashear, another heavyweight fighter, had been battling all game. Late in the third period, McSorley lost his temper. Instead of challenging Brashear to a fair fight, he swung his stick like a weapon, striking Brashear in the head. Brashear collapsed to the ice, his helmet bouncing, his body convulsing in frightening spasms. The league suspended McSorley for the rest of the season and later extended it to a full year. He was also charged in court, becoming one of the only NHL players ever convicted for an on-ice incident. That moment ended his career, and it forever defined him. Instead of being remembered only as Gretzky's protector and a tough guy, McSorley became a symbol of hockey's darker side. If McSorley's story is about a career ruined by one terrible choice, then Derek Boogaard's story is about the tragic cost of being an enforcer. Boogaard was known as the Boogeyman, and the nickname fit him perfectly. At 6'7" and nearly 270 pounds, he was one of the largest fighters the league had ever seen. When he squared up with someone, the arena buzzed with nervous energy. Everyone knew it was going to be ugly. His punches were devastating. Many players admitted they simply didn't want to fight him. But here's the truth. Boogaard's role wasn't just scary for opponents. It was deadly for him. He fought often, and each fight took a toll. Behind the scenes, he dealt with pain, injuries, and the mental strain that came with being expected to fight night after night. Like many enforcers, he turned to painkillers and alcohol to cope. In 2011, tragedy struck. Bogard died from an overdose at just 28 years old. Later studies revealed he also suffered from CTE, the same brain disease found in Bob Probert. His death shook the hockey world and forced people to ask difficult questions about the cost of fighting in the NHL. Bogard's story is heartbreaking because he wasn't just a fighter. He was loved by his teammates, adored by fans, and remembered by many as a gentle giant off the ice. Yet his job required him to be violent every night, and that job ultimately destroyed him. McSorley and Bogard showed two sides of hockey fear. McSorley's career ended in disgrace after crossing the line into pure violence. Bogard's career ended in tragedy, a reminder that even the scariest players often suffered the most. Not all fear in hockey comes from forwards or defensemen. Sometimes it comes from the one position you'd least expect, the goalie. And no goalie embodied that better than Ron Hextall. Hextall was unlike any goaltender the NHL had seen before. He was fiery, aggressive, and downright violent at times. If you came too close to his crease, he wouldn't just push you out. He'd slash you across the legs or swing his stick like a baseball bat. One of his most infamous moments came in the 1989 playoffs. After Montreal Canadiens forward Chris Chelios delivered a questionable hit on one of Hextall's teammates, Hextall snapped. He skated the entire length of the ice, gloves flying off, and attacked Chelios in front of a stunned crowd. But it wasn't just his temper that made him dangerous. Hextall was also talented. He was one of the first goalies to score a goal by shooting the puck the length of the ice, and he played with an intensity that inspired his teammates. Still, ask anyone who played against him, and they'll tell you, facing Hextall wasn't just about beating a goalie, it was about surviving his rage. If Hextall showed that even goalies could be feared, Tiger Williams proved that intimidation could become a full-time job. Tiger Williams holds a record in the NHL that might never be broken, over 3,900 penalty minutes, the most in league history. To put it simply, Williams lived in the penalty box. His entire career was built on being a nightmare for opponents. Unlike some other fighters, Tiger didn't just wait for trouble to come to him. He went looking for it. He threw hits, started scrums, and dropped the gloves constantly. Opponents hated playing against him because they knew he'd drag them into battles they didn't want. He was relentless, like a storm that never passed. And yet, fans loved him. He had a wild personality and a flair for the dramatic. After scoring goals, he'd ride his stick down the ice like it was a horse, sending the crowd into a frenzy. It was outrageous, it was cocky, and it was pure Tiger Williams. Williams wasn't the biggest guy, but he fought with a level of aggression that made him terrifying. He didn't care if he lost a fight. He cared about sending a message. By the time the final whistle blew, the other team knew they'd been through a war. Together, Hextall and Williams remind us that fear in hockey comes in many forms. Sometimes it's a goalie who refuses to be pushed around. Sometimes it's a forward who builds his entire career on chaos. But either way, these men left their opponents shaken and made fans realize just how unpredictable and violent hockey could be. If there's one player who perfectly fits the role of hockey's ultimate villain, it's Claude Lemieux. Lemieux wasn't the biggest fighter, and he wasn't known for endless penalty minutes like Domi or Tiger Williams. But what made him so hated and so feared was his ability to hurt opponents in the biggest moments. He was a playoff performer, a man who always seemed to rise when the games mattered most. And along the way, he developed a reputation as one of the dirtiest players the NHL has ever seen. The moment that defined his legacy came in 1996 during the playoffs, when he checked Chris Draper of the Detroit Red Wings from behind. Draper's face slammed into the boards, leaving him with broken bones and a jaw wired shut. The injury was horrifying. That single act sparked one of the most heated rivalries in hockey history, the blood feud between the Colorado Avalanche and the Red Wings. The following season, Detroit got its revenge. In one of the NHL's most legendary brawls, Darren McCarty jumped Lemieux during a game, pummeling him while the crowd went wild. It was ugly, it was violent, and it became part of hockey history. For years after that, every matchup between Colorado and Detroit carried that same fire. That's what made Lemieux so scary. He wasn't the strongest or the fastest, but he knew how to get under your skin and make enemies everywhere he went. And he thrived on it. He won 4 Stanley Cups with 3 different teams, proving that his style, as hated as it was, also worked. Lemieux reminds us that fear in hockey isn't just about fists or hits. Sometimes it's about reputation. It's about being the guy everyone hates, but no one can ignore.